Good afternoon, distinguished panelists and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Young Lee-jeon, former Director General for the Korean Peninsula Peace Regime Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. It's my honor and pleasure to moderate today's session. North Korea's policy shift in inter-Korean relations and our unification diplomacy strategy. In the first time slot, which marks the start of the 9th Jeju Forum. First of all, I would like to commend the Jeju Forum for its extraordinary support and welcome everyone in the audience for joining us for today. I feel very fortunate to have distinguished panelists from the United States of America, People's Republic of China, and Republic of Korea here with us. Before we move on to the panelist presentation, let me briefly share some recent developments in the Korean Peninsula. North Korea has been escalating its threats and provocations against us, including even recently, the other night, the launch of the military reconnaissance satellite, which is violating United Nations Security Council resolutions. And also today's topic related one, the Kim Jong-un's address to the plenum of 8th Workers' Party of Korea at the end of last year. He emphasized that North-South relations have been completely fixed into the relations between the two belligerent states, not homogeneous ones anymore. Moreover, Kim Jong-un said that the unification can never be achieved with the South and is now destroying monuments that symbolize unification efforts and removing unification references as well as images of the Korean Peninsula from their media. In contrast to Kim Jong-un's denial, the Republic of Korea remains ever more committed to realizing a unified Korean Peninsula. Korean people have always believed that we are one people and one nation. Regardless of what Kim Jong-un claims, it is embedded in every Korean's DNA, and this will never change. As you may know, the Korean Peninsula had long been a unified nation. Its division has lasted only about last 7 decades. Therefore, unification of the Korean Peninsula is a historical duty. Furthermore, President Yoon Suk-yeol articulated in his speech last March, unification of Korea is expand freedom and human rights to North Korean people, and a unified Korean Peninsula will undoubtedly contribute to the peace and prosperity in the Northeast Asia and the world. Under this recognition, the Republic of Korea would do its utmost to realize the vision of a unified Korean Peninsula that is free and at peace. This praise symbolizes our vision, and more readers around the world, including the US and Japan, at Camp David last year, are joining our efforts by showing their support. Unification is a challenging task that we cannot accomplish alone. We sincerely hope for continuous support from the international community in our endeavor. And today's session is a part of that effort. With that in mind, I have a few housekeeping notes. We have knowledgeable speakers from the US, China, and Korea. In that order, each speaker will have approximately 15 minutes for a presentation, followed by question and answer session. I hope we will end at 14:50 sharp, 2:50 p.m., which is 10 minutes earlier than expected, considering some scheduling issues. So please be mindful to stay within the allotted time. During the Q&As, I will provide some questions for efficient discussions. Now, let's please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Terry. Dr. Terry is no stranger to most of us. She's a senior fellow for Korean Studies at Council on Foreign Relations. She was a senior analyst at the CIA and director at the US National Security Council. She's also famous for being a producer of Beyond the Utopia, an acclaimed documentary film last year about North Korean defectors. Dr. Terry, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I have 15 minutes. Okay, good afternoon. I think I need my clicker. So thank you so much for the Jeju Forum organizers for inviting me here today to participate in this very important discussion. So I wanted to give you a quick update on where we are with North Korea to set the stage for our discussion on unification. Since the Hanoi summit, we know that Kim Jong-un continues to expand in quality and quantity the WMD program. We have North Korean missiles and artillery shells that are being used by Russian forces in Ukraine. And in return, North Korea is likely getting Russian help with its missiles and space program, and potentially concern is whether North Korea will be receiving sensitive technology from Russia. Beijing and Moscow are enabling Kim Jong-un, allowing Kim Jong-un to basically act with impunity. And all the while, Kim Jong-un is ratcheting up pressure on South Korea with fresh warnings of conflict, while denouncing South Korea as nothing more than an enemy state. Kim's declaration that unification with South Korea is now impossible, and that the two Koreas are no longer, they don't have any kind of kinship or they're not homogeneous, but they're instead two separate belligerent states in the midst of war. This goes beyond North Korea's usual bluster, and I think it should be interpreted as something significant, even momentous event. Kim Jong-un is implicitly criticizing his father and grandfather, and you know how he reveres the grandfather, and you know what his grandfather means in North Korea. So this is significant. Until Kim Jong-un's recent declaration on unification, North Korean leaders have maintained for decades that South Koreans were fellow compatriots to liberate, while demanding outside powers, meaning United States, not interfere with Korean hopes for unification. But now these kind of regime phrases that they used to be used before, like great ethnic unity, peaceful unification, reconciliation, fellow countrymen, they're all being jettisoned as something from the past. And then, of course, there's warning of inevitable conflict with South Korea. And to show that Kim Jong-un is quite serious about all of this, he has even gone as far as to delete hundreds of texts from KCNA that spoke about the possibility of unification. They even deleted phrases like northern half of the peninsula, northern, and so on, to show that he's very serious about this shift. So given this environment, what should be South Korea's unification and diplomacy strategy? And I just gave some recommendation, like form an interagency group, I think right away, to think about current challenges and craft a strategy that really articulate policy objectives, assess options, and then develop overall strategy. But first step is to clearly define and articulate why is unification in South Korea's interest. I know South Korea has been, of course, for decades doing a lot of work on this, but it means really examining and accurately assessing the current interests and motivations of also other key actors, talking about United States, China, Russia, Japan, the United Nations. Then draft an integrate policy options document that confirms this strategic approach, right? Your objective scope of diplomacy, diplomatic strategy effort, timelines, requirements, preparatory actions, chain of command, communication responsibilities, and accountability of various documents. The more specific we can do this, the better. Once why unification is in South Korea's interest is clearly defined and articulated, I think the next step is to develop a unification diplomacy strategy that accurately considers the interests of United States and neighboring countries. This means pursuing country-specific unification diplomacy. So it's not kind of like, oh, unification is a good thing, but country-specific unification diplomacy that considers specific national interests and circumstances, right? So it means coming up with a detailed, persuasive logic that caters to each power's concerns, because they are different. For example, for United States, it could be about easing concerns about securing nuclear weapons in a contingency scenario. For both US and Japan, it's assuaging their concerns about maybe emergence of a pro-China unified Korea. It may be. But here I would go even more specific than simply say what's in the interest of the United States. If you're talking about diplomatic strategy, U.S. is about to have a presidential election. How is the Biden administration and how the Trump administration would view unification could be different, and their concerns could be different. And then, of course, for China and Russia, concerns are very different. For them, it could be assuaging concerns that unified Korea would not necessarily take a lopsided pro-U.S. stance on all policy decisions. So it's really a juggling act. Meanwhile, South Korea may also want to expand unification diplomacy to United Nations and European countries, as well as international financial institutions, as their aid will be required to rebuild North Korea's economy post-unification. And I think closely cooperating with Washington and its allies obviously is important. I know there are many issues and many agendas besides unification. That's the problem, that's the challenge. But still, in all levels of a meeting, if South Korea really feels unification diplomacy is a priority, then it needs to be brought up. It needs to be on the agenda and explain why unification is of critical importance, not only to South Korea's interests, but in U.S. interests. If you're having a meeting with the U.S., you need to explain to them why it is in U.S. interests, right? And just like there's a human rights envoy on North Korea, North Korea's envoy, but also human rights envoy in the U.S. and South Korea. Both Washington and South Korea may consider having some sort of, envoy to special envoy that's specifically designated to deal with unification issues of the Korean Peninsula. And if that's a hard thing to do, we do right now have a human rights envoy like Julie Turner and Ishima Ambassador Lee. Maybe they can be dual-headed to also address unification issue. The point is, it's important for Washington and Seoul to develop a common vision. And once that is developed, US and South Korea could actively identify and engage with other parties, such as Japan, to participate in multilateral talks. But what is important is to secure support for unification from neighboring countries. And the neighboring countries should be sufficiently convinced that the vision is associated with this commitment, and that it's workable, that this is some sort of not a pipe dream, but this is a workable plan. Meanwhile, expand Track 1 and Track 2 strategic dialogue over preparation for different unification scenarios with Washington. There are several, not only several, there are a number of different scenarios, right? There's not only one path to unification. So there are numerous topics that could be discussed in these Track 1, Track 2 meetings, Track 1.5 meetings, including future of US-ROC alliance, post-unification, like what does that look like? We know what it looks like right now, but what does it look like post-unification? How stabilization operation in North Korea will work? What about South-North, military integration, economic reconstruction of North Korea, role of U.S. forces? There are so many things that needs to be discussed. But South Korea's diplomacy or diplomatic strategy on unification does not end with just U.S. and neighbors, right? As important is how North Koreans think about unification, how North Koreans think about unification and their individual prospects after unification. We know that despite Kim Jong-un's efforts right now to really crack down on outside information, on foreign, he has stepped up his efforts to really crack down on this, but we know foreign information, outside information is still getting into North Korea. That really challenges North Korea's regime myth and decades of indoctrination. So I think North Korean people need to be given hope that the US and South Korea are not mortal enemies, and the unification could also be advantageous for them, right? This will be particularly important with North Korean elites who are likely to oppose unification, because if there's unification, they have vested interest in keeping the system going, right? There are many, many issues, and South Korea will need to develop and communicate policies on such issues as provision of humanitarian aid, and jobs, selective amnesty, property rights. There's a lot of things, and but I think this is something to consider. My point is not to really forget about the North Koreans on this strategy, where do we form diplomatic strategy. And interesting, I think German unification could be a useful example, and I know that South Korean government has looked at this for many decades. Of course, the German case and South Korean case are monumentally different. North Korea's economy is even more distorted than East Germany ever was. And unlike East and West Germany, North and South Korea have virtually had no contact except these family reunion things, with each other over, since the war. Many economists thus warn that total bill of unification likely will be considerably higher than the $1.9 trillion cost of German unification. So I understand that there's a very different case. Still, there are many lessons to be learned. Most East Germans really came to see unification as something that would be good for them personally. East Germans viewed West Germany as more economically advanced and rich, and thus anticipated that unification would give them better life economically. And so building, again, my previous point, building positive North Korean expectation for post-unification quality of life, even for the elites and the military, and getting that message into North Korea will be tremendously beneficial, just reiterating the point that I made in the previous slide. But let me be very candid here. The ultimate challenge for the South Korean government, I think, is solidifying internal South Korean public's support for unification and building domestic political consensus, right? The ultimate challenge will be convincing South Korea's own population of the wisdom of pursuing unification and building consensus over time. South Koreans, particularly the younger generation of the Koreans who are really concerned about their own future and their own, from economy to youth unemployment, right? This Korean dream of their parents' generation, of this war-torn country rising from the ashes. This is sort of a relic of the past for many of the younger generation, right? So you hear these phrases like Hell Joseon, and they are very wary about the potential financial burden that they'll have to bear if unification were to occur. So for the South Korean government, it's critical to really ramp up its efforts to persuade this public that a unified Korea is an investment in the future of the Korean people. And of course, that's easy to say and very hard to do. It's not easy to sell benefits of unification to the public. Look how hard the South Korean government right now is just dealing with a demographic crisis on the low fertility issue, for example. Even with all the various governments, attempts and trying and incentives and subsidies, Koreans are just not interested in having children, right? So similarly, South Korean public will have a hard time getting on board with unification, with the cost of unification and division, worrying about that, even as they're living under a nuclear threat from North Korea. So at the same time of trying to get South Korean public support, continued efforts to be made to get global support, right? Seoul should be aware, they need to first build a network of powers, right? I mentioned earlier about the United States, Japan, and China, and Russia, and so on, but also key middle powers, Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, Australia, to support unification. While unification should be led by the two Koreas and supported by the regional powers, international cooperation network is still very important. The significance of unification diplomacy is already proven by the so-called 2+4 diplomacy from German unification, right? You know what that is? That's a German, two German states and the four allied forces that occupy Germany, U.S., Great Britain, France, Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. So thanks to advance in social media, public opinion has great influence on international issues, and people could unite globally. And you've seen this from South Africa example with apartheid. And look what is happening in Gaza. So the UN administration should execute public diplomacy strategy to build a complex network of political circles, media, academics, civic groups in major parties and international community. I know I'm running out of my 15 minutes. I'm very exact with time, so I'll just try to wrap up. So preparing a variety of unification scenarios is important because, of course, there are a number of ways that unification could occur, like I mentioned earlier. But out of all the scenarios, I still think a hard landing scenario in the North is most likely rather than a soft landing scenario. So unification scenario stemming from some sort of instability from the North. But even in a peaceful integration or soft landing scenario, which I think is unlikely, South Korea and the region will face serious challenges, including massive humanitarian crisis, securing nuclear weapons, military and security force demobilization, other human rights issues. So only with a very detailed preparation and planning and close collaboration and coordination between South Korea, US, and other regional key powers challenges will be mitigated. And I will just conclude with this last slide that I would say the time is of essence. It's really time for the United States and South Korea to augment they already have a joint military planning, but they need to really craft a comprehensive, detailed, political, diplomatic, economic, legal, social, this diplomatic strategy. And at the end, unification is not a quick or easy solution. We all know that. But perhaps, we can argue that it is the only conceivable solution for the long term in terms of long-term interest of the future of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for Dr. Terry for your insightful presentation. Basically, I couldn't agree more with you on the importance of preparing in details for unification and also unification diplomacy strategy and working closely with the US, Japan, and international community. Yeah. Now let's move on to Dr. Sie, from the Academy of History and Documentation of a Socialist, East China Normal University. He is now a visiting researcher at the Institute for Peace and Unification Studies at Seoul National University. His research interests include the history of inter-Korea relations, Sino-Korean relations, and South Korea's diplomacy. Dr. Sie, the floor is now yours.
Hello, everyone. It's my honor to have this opportunity to participate in the Jeju Forum. Thank you, Mr. Chung, and thank you, Mr. Chang. I'm sorry because the PDF cited wrong, so I will not show these pictures. So today I wanted to share my ideas about the China and the unification of the Korean Peninsula. It includes three parts. First is my opinion about Kim Jong-un's new unification policy. On December 13, 2023, Kim Jong-un announced that they would characterize the relationship between South and North Korea as a hostile relationship between the two countries, and then proposed that the reunification with South Korea would never be achieved. Some analysts believe Kim Jong-un has decided to fight a war, but most analysts disagree. Different scholars have different views, but I believe that Kim Jong-un's declaration that he can never achieve reunification with South Korea. It's not a short-term tactics, but a strategical choice to compete among the reunification. In fact, since South Korea successfully implemented the Nord politic, and the two Koreans joined the UN at the same time, North Korea has completely lost the possibility to reunifying the Korean Peninsula. After the end of the Cold War, South Korea was not only far ahead of North Korea economically, but North Korea has also lost the protection of the socialist campaign. In terms of diplomacy and strategic security, in this case, North Korea chose to maintain the security of the region by possessing nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un announced to abandon the ambitious goal of national reunification was also based on a choice made for the survival of his regime. From the perspective of political legitimacy, Kim Jong-un's regime is still very fragile. Failed economic development cannot provide enough legitimacy for its regime. North Korea can only choose to strengthen propaganda to gain ideological legitimacy. For the Kim Jong-un's regime, negotiation with South Korea on the issues of reunification may provide short-term economic benefits and are also conducive to domestic nationalist propaganda. However, such gains are not stable due to regime changes in South Korea. Moreover, South Korea's goal for using inter-Korean exchanges to achieve reunification by absorption has not changed, which undoubtedly poses a long-term threat to the Kim Jong-un regime. Therefore, the Kim Jong-un government gave up on reunification and emphasized the hostile relationship between North and South Korea as a strategic choice for the security of its own region. And the second part, I wanted to introduce China's policy to reunification of the Korean Peninsula in history, because I'm a history doctor. So, in my opinion, China's policy towards the Korean Peninsula can be called maintaining a dual-track balance. That is seeking economical and trade cooperation and development with South Korea, and maintaining a special relationship with North Korea in terms of security and geopolitics. In fact, China's stance and policies on the issues of inter-Korean reunification had undergone several adjustments. During the Korean War, China sent troops to fight in Korea to support the reunification of North Korea. In July 1953, the signing of the Korean War Armistice Agreement declared the failure of North Korea's armed reunification. Since then, although China has provided North Korea with a large amount of military assistance and supported Kim Il-sung's Southern Revolution, it is no longer willing to support North Korea's armed reunification. In the 1960s, Kim Il-sung stepped up his penetration into the South and created multiple conflicts near the 13th parallel. The situation on Korean Peninsula fell into tension. However, with the reconciliation of Sino-US relations, Kim Il-sung was forced to adjust the unification policy. That is from Vietnam-style guerrilla warfare to the approach of peaceful reunification. In the early 1970s, China and the US reached the following force consensus. on the Korean issue. First, to seek and maintain long-term stability and peace on Korean Peninsula. Second, to recognize the legitimacy, the existence of North and South Korea, and have equal political status. Third, maintain the interests of North and South Korea respectively while restraining the allies. Last, the temporary stay of the U.S. military in South Korea is an important factor in stabilizing the situation on the peninsula. After the reunification of Vietnam in 1975, when Kim Il-sung visited to China, visiting China to meet Mao Zedong for the last time, he hoped to seek China's support for the reunification of the Korean Peninsula by force. But Chairman Mao declined with the words, "My eyes can no longer see, and my ears cannot not hear." This shows that China had adjusted its position to the reunification of the Korean Peninsula, objectively recognized the existence of the South Korea region and the U.S. ROK aliens, and hopes to maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. By the late 1970s and the early 1980s, China began to integrate into the world economic systems through reform and opening up. China-ROK relationship achieved substantial development, and China also made adjustments to its policy and the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. South Korea's rapid economic development has attracted special attention from China. Deng Xiaoping mentioned the four little dragons many times. To this end, China has proposed the policy of closing the door but not locking it. In Chinese, 关门不上锁, towards South Korea. But the emphasis is on closing the door. However, the Zhuo Changrong hijacking in 1983 and the torpedo boat incident in 1985 provided South Korea with the opportunity to use unexpected events to contact the Chinese government and improve relationship with China. Since then, China-ROK relationship has developed rapidly, mainly in sports exchanges and non-government trade. In order to avoid causing dissatisfaction and interference from North Korea, China has adopted the policy of differentiating between officials and civilians, 官民有别 in Chinese, separating politics and economicals, 政经分离, and the policy of doing not talking, 只做不说. And the people-to-people exchange between China and South Korea has begun to increase significantly. The Seoul Olympics in September 1988 was an important turning point in the changes in China-ROK relations, based on its design to maintain peace and stability on the peninsula. China expressed its hope that the negotiations between North and South Korea on co-hosting the Olympic Games will be successful, and eventually participated in the Seoul Olympics. In 1990, the China Chamber of International Commerce and the Korean Trade Promotion Organization signed an agreement to mutually establish a representative office in Beijing. In 1991, under China's persuasion and pressure, in order to avoid falling into the passive situation of South Korea joining the UN announced, North Korea accepted to join the UN at the same time as South Korea. On April 13, 1992, China's Foreign Minister Qian Qicheng and Yi Song-o agreed during the talks in Beijing to immediately begin negotiations for the establishment of diplomatic relations. King Yi-sung hopes that China can consider the current changes in inter-Korean relations and the North Korean-US relations, then postpone the establishment of diplomatic relations with South Korea for 1 year. However, China was determined to establish diplomatic relationship with South Korea, and the negotiation process was quite and simple. King Yi-sung reluctantly accepted the reality. On August 24, China and South Korea signed and issued a communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations. After the reform and opening up, the Chinese leaders' concepts has undergone major changes, and their policies towards the Korean Peninsula has also undergone substantial changes, realizing the transformation from one Korean to two Koreans. China may maintain friendly relationships and exert diplomatic influence with North and South Korea at the same time, which not only improves the economic environment, but also gets rid of diplomatic isolation. However, the North Korea nuclear crisis broke out less than a year later, and the Korean Peninsula remains turbulent to this day. Despite this, China continues its policy of maintaining a dual-track balance on the Korean Peninsula. The third part, I want to discuss the reunification of the Korean Peninsula under the strategic competition between China and the United States. Looking back at history, the adjustment of relations between great powers has an important impact on the reunification process of the Korean Peninsula, especially China-US relations, which play a key role. In the context, the intensive strategic competition between China and the United States, China is unlikely to make major adjustments to its stance on the reunification of the peninsula. It is in China's best interest to continue the dual-track balance policy. The greater the strategic pressure from the US, the more important North Korea will be to China in terms of geopolitics and ideological security. For Kim Jong-un, the Ukraine war and the strategic competition between China and the US can provide him with diplomatic bargaining chips with Russia and China. And he maybe can even try to return to the trilateral alliance between China, Russia, and North Korea during the Cold War. For South Korea, which hopes to achieve peaceful reunification, if the Korean Peninsula returns to the security pattern of confrontation between China, US, North Korea, and US, Japan, South Korea, reunification will become increasingly distant. Therefore, the stability and development of China-ROK relations play a vital role in preventing this unfortunate situation, because the two countries have a broad basis of economic and trade interests, and both hope that Korean Peninsula can achieve denuclearization and maintain peace and stability in Northeast Asia. A few days ago, the China-Japan ROK summit held in Seoul seemed to have a good start. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, Dr. Xie, thank you very much. And it was very interesting and informative presentation that look at the Korean Peninsula unification issues from a historical and Chinese perspective. Also, you gave us an outline of China's position on Korean Peninsula unification. And finally, I would like to introduce Professor Park Won-gon from Ewha Women's University. Since 2021, he has been a professor in the North Korean Studies Department and a director of the Institute for Unification Studies. He was also a professor in Handong Global University and worked in the Kaida for years. His research area mainly covered the Korea-US alliance, North Korean politics, diplomacy, and military affairs, as well as Northeast Asian international relations. He has been advising the government on North Korean issues for a long time as a member of several committees. Yeah, Professor Park, you have the floor.
All right, thank you, Director General Chan. This is my honor and privilege to share my view with my very distinguished colleagues, Dr. Si and Sumi, of course. I know her for how many years? More than 2 decades, something like that. And Dr. Shi is relatively recently I have met him, but we have such a very meaningful time in China. A couple of months ago, we have China, Japan, and South Korea, the officials and scholars gathered together in Xi'an, and we have a very candid discussion. Today, of course, I'm going to talk about North Korea's policy shift, and toward the South Korea is such a huge issue for past, since the end of the last year. And Kim Jong-un, Chairman Kim, has made announcement to but total change, policy shift toward the South Korea. And of course, he is also talking about the abandonment of unification policy. And I am still quite busy because of this sudden his announcement. And for past almost 5 months, I have more than 20-something meetings and conference, and with many South Korean, the scholars who are watching the North Korea. And also, I have a chance to talk this issue with many American friends, and also Chinese, and also Japanese too. Not the Russian, but I haven't chance to talk with Russian yet. So it's quite interesting and quite important for South Korea, because already Director John mentioned that this reunification is such a very important issue for North Korea. Of course, South Korea, we are paying attention about the unification, but it's like I can say 100 times put the more emphasis about on unification in North Korea. So today, with a limited time, and I'm going to talk about the why North Korea has changed policy towards South Korea, and why they are totally discard reunification policy. And I'm going to talk about background, and also I'm going to talk about limitation about the Kim Jong-un's the new policies towards South Korea. And I'm not going to repeat this one, and because last year, the December, the plenary meeting, and the January, the Supreme People's Assembly, very clearly mentioning that Kim Jong-un's changed policy towards South Korea and abandoning unification. At the same time, well, you know that North Korea said that they are simply ready for the war, and people are saying that determination for war. And this becoming quite popular, not what is the right or popular word, quite controversial among the many scholars, because but the 2 Americans, and they wrote about this very provocative argument article in the 38 North, and then also another, the former ambassador, he wrote about this one to national interest. They argue that simply Kim Jong-un is ready for the war. And North Korea is for the first time the end of the Korean War in 1953, and they are ready for the war. And personally, I totally disagree with their argument, so I have planned to send the kind of counter argument to the 38 North, but already the German ambassador, the Schaeffer, he make such a good counter argument for that, so I kind of not sent my own argument. But this is a very important policy shift. And then why then still? Why Kim Jong-un and North Korea, not suddenly, but had changed their policy. And I think the most important reason is that North Korea no longer have some kind of any kind of compete with South Korea. I said that this kind of they are give up to kind of compete with South Korea. You see, lately, South Korea, we have a survey every month, and around almost 80% of the South Korean is seeing the North Korea is very, very unfavorably. I mean, in year 2020 is a very critical year because that time North Korea blew up the joint South Korea, North and South Korea joint liaison office in Kaesong Industrial Complex. And since then, especially the South Korea young generation, MG generation, have such a negative view about North Korea. So still, we have almost 80% of South Korean people are seeing very unfriendly to North Korea. So North Korea have no way to compete with South Korea. So that's one of the reasons that North Korea changed their policy, because no longer they can get any kind of supporters for the North Korea in South Korea. So that's the first reason. Second one is that, of course, for some kind of internal cohesion, because it's a little bit controversial, but I'm pretty clear. If I have time, I can give many evidence that North Korea's economy has pretty much deteriorated. Even though some people are saying that, North Korea have a very better relationship with Russia and still get some support from China, but it's still North Korea is under the sanction, definitely limit their development of the economy. Especially Kim Jong-un is interesting enough in 2021 8th Party Congress. He said that he introduced a 5-year economic development plan, and he said that within the 5 years they will develop their own economy 1.4 times bigger. 1.4 times growth. It's practically impossible. In order to complete this kind of goal, they have to have at least 4% of annual growth for the 5 years, but it's impossible because Bank of South Korea, announced a very reliable source that in year 2021 minus 0.1% and 2022 minus 0.2%. And 2023, probably a little bit the positive view, but less than 1%. So no way to complete this goal that Kim Jong-un has introduced in 2021 8th Party Congress. And then more seriously, the ideological problem. North Korea say that the so-called bourgeois ideology infiltrate to North Korea. In other words, so-called K-culture, K-pops, K-dramas, K-musics. And for past 5 years, and when we have an interview with North Korean defectors who come to South Korea within the 5 years, almost 90-something% of the North Korean people have chance to watch the South Korean drama, music, or the movies. So it is widely spread, I can say that, in North Korea about the K-culture, because there are evidence that many people probably heard about this 3 very notorious law that has been passed by North Korea since 2020, law on rejecting reactionary ideology and culture. You see, this law mentioned that if the North Korean people just watch the Korean drama, he or she is put in jail at least 5 to 15 years. If I give this drama to my friend, and then he is the list of the lifetime to the death. It's a so severe punishment. It's another very clear evidence that North Korea could not prevent the spread of the Korean culture. And because of all these things, and it's a quite famous theory, and so-called seize mentality, not only North Korea, but most of the socialist countries during the Cold War, they emphasize seize mentality. Seize mentality means that they have been seized by the neighboring country. For the North Korean case, North Korea has seized by South Korea, Japan, and United States. So the North Korean leaders say that, because we have get the threat from the bourgeois and capitalist country, we have to have some unity and solidarity. It's a very effective propaganda means for past several decades. So I think they are simply going back to this kind of way to get used for them. And then crafting strategy for the establishment of the new code, of course, and Dr. Xi, I have a little bit different interpretation about him and different perspective, because North Korea and Kim Jong-un, and very clearly mentioning several times, at least 2 times officially, that right now the international world order is entering the new Cold War, and also he mentioned about multipolarity, and of course he is still trying to have some kind of block, as we have experienced it during the Cold War. Then definitely that Russia, China, and North Korea in one side, the other side South Korea, Japan, and United States. But interestingly enough, I have many chance to talk with the issue with my Chinese friends, and they said that China is absolutely opposed any kind of this bloc or this community, this kind of bloc, and they are not going to have any. And even China criticized the United States, one who wants to make some kind of bloc. So right now I can see some disparity, and it's a little bit difficult time between North Korea and China, especially about this issue. Okay, then we are talking about the 5 months, and because since Kim Jong-un has introduced this new policy towards South Korean unification, and one interesting phenomena that we can find at this moment is that North Korea is not officially talking about their abandonment or the discard of reunification policy. Usually, when they change this kind of policy, or in Korea we say Dosan line, and they are publishing many articles in their official newspaper like Nodong Shinmun, and try to educate the North Korean people. But we haven't seen any kind of articles in Nodong Shinmun for past 5 years. I know why. I will get there soon. So, and then Kim Jong-un has paid attention about the military side. Start with the March, and then up until now, you know that they just failed to have another round of the launching of a spy satellite. And they are North Korea is trying to raise tension on the Korean peninsula, but not the direct provocation, but they are simply doing some kind of a war scenario against South Korea. And because I don't have time, I'm not gonna go in detail about that. And then I'm gonna talk about limitation about North Korean shifting policy. And first thing, as the scholars or North Korean watchers, pretty much frustrated. I mean, I'm not the frustrated, but probably Kim Jong-un is pretty much frustrated, and because North Korea, so-called raison d'être, existence of their regime itself, is pretty much from these two historical missions that was first introduced by Kim Il-sung, and two historical missions are building socialism and reunifying the fatherland. Reunification is the most important mission for North Korea for past 7 decades. Suddenly, but Kim Jong-un is, discard this reunification, and then there is nothing can replace the reunification itself. And during the arduous march, you know that late 1990s, a very severe and serious famine, and North Koreans saying that North Korean regime and North Korean leader at the time, Kim Jong-il, said that because of the divide of the Korean peninsula, if we overcome this kind of divide and make one reunification again, then we can overcome all those difficulties. Every time North Korea has faced difficulties, they are talking about reunification. So I don't think there is anything can replace the reunification. That's the one thing Kim Jong-un could not officially give any kind of reason or argument for their own people for past 5 months. Okay, and then denial regime. Okay, this one is, we'll skip that. And a limit of new Cold War and bloc politics. Yes, it is true that recently we are seeing the very close cooperation between Russia and North Korea. Yes, but I think it's kind of marriage of convenience. Because of the Ukraine war, and there's kind of, I can say, temporary the cooperation between these two countries. And I just mentioned that trilateral cooperation among North Korea, Russia, and China is strongly opposed to those kind of things. And then when we take a look at the history, and Dr. Shi is, of course, expert on history, and we both of us are, like the Professor Chun Soo-ha, and we read the book. And according to his book, it's Chinese, very, very much Chinese scholars. Those three countries, since 1947 or 1950, they did not trust with each other. I mean, talking about Soviet Union, China, and North Korea. At the time, Mao Zedong and Stalin and Kim Il-sung, they did not trust each other. So when we take a look at the historical book, and their relationship is simply just pursue their tangible and some sense short-term interest, not the long-term share about their value or the ideology at all. So I can say that even though Kim Jong-un emphasized this bloc, but it's temporary and it's not going to be last long. And then finally, I will give some recommendation to our Ministry of Foreign Affairs because they asked me to do that. So a couple of things. First, we have to reject two-state solution. Yes, it's definitely not acceptable. And we have to maintain so-called provisional special relationship aimed at unification. You see, I'm teaching the MG generation, and they are simply not interested in unification at all. If we just get rid of the nations, ethnicities, then they are far less interested about the unification. So we have to keep this unification in terms of the national unity. And Joseon, and not the Joseon, but Korean Peninsula. And second is advocating for the importance of peace reunification. Because actually Kim Jong-un's announcement is using their military power to occupy the South Korea. It's a definitely non-peaceful resolution at all. So one example I'm pretty much encouraged that is September last year, the Camp David declaration among the South Korea, Japan, and United States. For the first time for past several decades, we put this one, support a unified Korean Peninsula that is free and peace. And I strongly suggest, of course they are already doing that, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and more actively pursuing this kind of the importance of reunification. And also Dr. Sumi mentioned that it's important to have on the global support. I definitely agree with her. And those kind of effort. And finally, for the North Korean defectors, we have to maintain this kind of constitution. And constitution said that, our constitution said that we are pursuing the peaceful reunification. And North Korea is, of course, our territory, and North Korean people is our people too. If we give up and we could not protect North Korean people and defectors, especially in China. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comprehensive presentation, Professor Park. And you pointed out the background and limitations of North Korea's policy shift and emphasized that we need to clearly reaffirm our provisional special relationship with North Korea, aiming at unification continuously. And now I think the three panelists finished their very insightful presentations, and now I would like to move on to the Q&A. And let me begin with our discussions by asking I will ask just quick questions, and then I will also open the floor. You can ask any questions, and I will ask just three of you briefly that then I think Dr. C mentioning about the strategic competition between US and China. But how do you think the US and China can contribute to the process of achieving peaceful unification? That is my first question. And second one, we didn't talk much about the unification vision itself, but what key elements do you think should be considered or included in this unification vision? Just briefly, I think I will ask each of you and just answer briefly or something like that. Thank you. Dr. Terry or
The first part was China
competition. Yeah, how the considering this kind of competition, but U.S. and China, how they can contribute to process of achieving peaceful unification. Yeah.
So, when I used to be in the government, I tried, I went to Beijing many times, and we tried to have a conversation about unification. And of course, China does not want to engage with that because what it implies, right? If North Korea finds out you're talking about unification, you're worried about unification by absorption, you're worrying about instability. And North Korea is China's ally. They really didn't want to engage in this conversation. So we had to be creative and try to say, well, what if there's like contingency scenario that has nothing to do with instability, but maybe there's a natural disaster? How would we, US and China work together to support this? Like trying to find other ways to address this issue. Because I think one of the most important things is that if there's a misunderstanding and miscommunication, it's very difficult, right? Because we already saw, you mentioned the Korean War. We already saw the kind of dynamic that played out. If there's an instability, and US's concern is you don't want to you don't want to have any kind of miscommunication, misunderstanding with China. So even when the Chinese didn't want to talk to us, we were very clear about we wanted to have a, even if it's a one-way dialogue, what our interest is, what we are looking. So there's a transparency and there's no misunderstanding that we're trying to do anything other. So I think just to answer his question, I think it's very difficult right now, particularly, it has always been difficult, even without this US-China, tension and rivalry, to address the unification issue. Now it's extra difficult with the US and China situation. I think one of the things that's very important is for South Korea to continue to make case with China that why unification is not necessarily the worst scenario for China, which already China is very, very wary for a whole host of reasons. But I think even if you're chipping away at that, that's important. And I know former President Park Geun-hye, for example, when she called unification a jackpot, and tried to sort of engage with China on that theory. Like, China is #1 trading partner for South Korea. Even in a unified China scenario, Korea scenario, is this the worst possible thing for China? So trying to somehow change that mindset, which is very, very difficult. Second part is whether they want to or not, I think this is a contingency scenario, and potentially we need to have a dialogue with China about this. And again, even if they don't want to, even if it's a one-way dialogue, I think it's still very important to sit down with them and try to at least talk about some of our concerns, U.S. South Korea concerns, so there is no misunderstanding in the future.
About this question history, when China and the U.S. have a common enemy, Soviet Union, then they, in 1970s, so they pushed each other's allies, North Korea and South Korea. You must too keep peace in Korean Peninsula. So the North and the South talks began in 1970s. But now everybody knows America see China as the greatest competitor. So there's no chance for these two countries to sit on the table and okay, let's organize to have talks about Korean Peninsula or even unification. But why this happened? I personally think because U.S. found that China has some important changes. So I understand the U.S. policy. Okay, that don't mean I agree. I understand why they wanted to change their policy, American policy, to China. So I think the answer is waiting. Yes, waiting. Chinese new leaders' conception changed when they recognize that, okay, North Korea is not ideological partner or geopolitical partners. Maybe free FTA with South Korea and Japan is the best interest for China. Something will change, but we as a young Chinese, what we can do is waiting someone goes, waiting China has some changed. So that's my opinion. Yeah.
Well, Director John, you asked the most difficult questions. And first, you are talking about the strategic competition between China and the United States. Definitely make a very negative impact on the reunification of the Korean Peninsula, because we are seeing that China is giving any kind of undivided support to North Korea. But I'm seeing some kind of some positive sign. And very recently, we have a trilateral summit among South Korea, Japan, and China. And even though we failed to have a joint declaration and put on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in the joint declaration, but still we have chance to talk about the Korean Peninsula issue, even though this very intensified strategic competition between China and United States. So I see some chance, and of course I agree with Sumi that, and we need to persuade. We have to keep saying about this issue with Chinese. And at the same time, important thing is that we have to more strengthen the alliance between United States and South Korea, because I know that we have a very detailed kind of a plan with the United States to prepare all the possible scenarios, including probably hard landing. You mentioned that, but we stopped to talk about for the past 5 years. So we need to resume this kind of a scenario and the preparation with the United States. And first question, unification vision, that's more tough one, because our government, Union government, is trying to reconsider this our unification policy, because it has been the 30 years. This year marks 30 years anniversary of the 1994 about the unification strategy. But it's getting more complicated, because the first thing that makes such a huge impact is Kim Jong-un's sudden change about the policy towards South Korean unification policy. Because before that, even in South Korea, some scholars and people are saying that, we have to have a totally new reunification policy. No longer put the emphasis on the nations and ethnicities. Rather, we consider North Korea as a very independent and legal entity. And then we need to pursue some kind of peace and coexistence. But no longer we can say that because of the North Korea. So right now, our government is talking about and trying to elaborate some kind of reunification vision, and I'm one of the members of that one, but it's very tough, the mission that we have to do.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, and I will open the floor to the audience, and probably we'll receive the 2 or 3 questions. And please identify yourself briefly and ask a question. And can you ask the question, please?
Hi, Stephen Borowick of Nikkei Asia. My question is for Professor Park. You coined a snappy phrase by describing the relationship between China and North Korea as a marriage of convenience. In the aftermath of the trilateral summit on Monday, could you describe where you see that going? Do you see perhaps that relationship coming under increasing strain, and do you think the lack of ideological coherence that you pointed to could become more pronounced in the face of things like China perhaps moving a little bit closer to Japan and South Korea and the upcoming U.S. election? Thank you.
So you're talking about China and North Korea, not the Russia and North Korea.
Specifically China and North Korea, yeah.
Did answer right now, or take some questions, or did answer?
We receive the question first, and then probably answer together. I think it's better. Yeah, on the center. Yeah.
Hi, this is Chad from NK News. Chad O'Carroll. A question for Sumi Terry. I mean, we've been hearing about. I've been attending seminars like this on unification for as long as I can remember. I just wonder, do you not think there could be more value and stabilization on the Korean Peninsula if South Korea actually mirrored what North Korea is doing? Thank you.
Mirrored as in saying?
Abandon unification, we'll just coexist as 2 separate states and move on that way. It seems that's what the people in South Korea would actually prefer.
Okay, in front here, in front. I think in front. Do you have any questions? Or?
네, 안녕하세요. 아시아투데이 천현명 기자입니다. CA 박사님께 질문을 드립니다. 북한의 무력 통일 기조가 평화 통일로 바뀌었다라고 중간에 말씀을 해주셨는데 최근까지 북한 김정은이 동족 평화라는 단어를 완전히 삭제해야 한다고 하기 전까지는 무력 적화 통일을 기조를 지금까지 추진하고 있다고 저는 보는데 지금까지 북한이 화전 양면 전술을 계속 구사하면서 끊임없이 그런 도발을 시도했던 것을 보면 그렇게 판단하고 있습니다. 그래서 북한의 대남 정책 전환에 대한 중국의 인식을 좀 자세하게 듣고 싶습니다. 그래서 북한이 최근 체제 유지를 위해서 북중러 대 한미일 대결 구도 부각하는 것에 대해서 어떻게 보시고 있고, 또 최근에 얼마 전에 있었던 삼국 정상회의 이후에 비핵화라는 단어를 중국이 공식 석상에서 오랜만에 언급을 했는데 그 부분에 대해서 북한이 바로 외무성 담화를 통해서 어떠한 주권적 침해를 용납할 수 없다라면서 우회적으로 중국을 비판한 것으로도 보이는데 이 부분에 대해서도 좀 답변 부탁드리고요. 박원권 교수님께 간단히 질문 드리면, 북한의 전쟁 가능성에 대해서 낮다고 말씀을 해주셨는데 김정은 그런 최고 지도자에 의한 오판 가능성에 대해서는 또 어떻게 보시는지, 그것과 관련해서 갈루치 전 북핵 특사가 최근 언급한 동북아 핵전쟁 발발 가능성에 대해서는 어떻게 생각하시는지 궁금합니다.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the questions. And we don't have enough time. Please, I think, ask the panelists to answer the question consecutively. And yeah,
Okay, I will spend just two minutes. 정 기자님 나중에 따로 제가 좀 말씀을 드려야 될 것 같아서 이거는 시간. Okay, Stevens from Nikkei, and there are so many evidence. I mean, I can back up my argument. First, very recently, you see, South Korea and China have the foreign ministers meeting, and at the time, right after meeting, North Korea released a statement, and then they actually criticized not only South Korea but implicitly China too. And then about the trilateral summit, and then after declaration, North Korea within like 4 or 5 hours, and then the North Korea's foreign affairs ministry and released statement, and then they actually criticized China to join to simply talk about the nuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And one more thing, 2012 until 2017, China and North Korea's relationship was very worsened. And then 2018, when then President Trump decided to meet Kim Jong-un, and then Xi Jinping invite Kim Jong-un in Beijing. That is another kind of sign and then dynamic among the three countries, China, United States, and North Korea. If China is thinking about the North Korea in terms of the Sino-United States relations, so it's not the value or ideologically shared alliance at all. That's why I said that is marriage of convenience.
So I'll answer Chad's question, whether South Korea should abandon the policy of unification and mirror what North Korea is doing. And my answer is no. And maybe it's also irrational because, you know, I am also, my entire paternal side of the family came from North Korea. I grew up being raised by my grandparents who literally spoke with a heavy North Korean accent, and they never got to see their families ever again since the division. They came down to the South right before the war broke out, and they never made it back. They never got to see their families, parents, brothers, sisters ever again. So I have a kind of a different perspective. I feel like that's like abandoning 24 million? How many people are in North Korea now? Why? You know, you spend a lot of time with defectors, right? I also spend a lot of time with defectors. I'm shocked every time I spend a time with defector because they're like my aunt, my Como, my emo, my nephew, my niece, whatever. It has a very, like, same people. Thousands of years of shared history and culture and bloodline and everything else that the Koreans care about. This division and this, what happened since the Korean War, that's the anomaly. And so I feel like just because you were stuck in the northern half of the Korean Peninsula after the war broke out, and then we get to live in South Koreans in the 10th largest economy in the world with, you know, K-drama and K-pop and BTS and all of that. I just spent a lot of time walking around Seoul. Wow, incredible. And look about the North Korean people. How are they living? And why is that? Because they were stuck in that regime for the last 70 plus years. They have to have that fate, and we're going to just completely abandon it. No, I don't believe that South Korea should abandon unification. And yes, I understand that South Korean public doesn't want it, and de facto policies keep kicking the can down the road. understandably so, because no one wants to pay for it. It's going to cost a lot more than, as I mentioned, $1.9 trillion that took to unify Germany. But should South Korea abandon it as a policy? Because that's going to do what? Like, I don't necessarily believe it. So it's my personal opinion. I feel very passionate about it, obviously. But that's, you asked about a question whether South Korea should abandon unification, and my answer is no.
So, a question has been about China's policy to North Korea. Yes.
Was there a question for him?
So, okay, in my presentation, I just said China's policy to Korean Peninsula is maintaining a two-dual track imbalance. One, that means North Korea is an important geopolitical and ideological partner. The special relationship that is based on the special Chinese CCP, they are ideology. So CCP in China, ruled in China, when the CCP ruled China, that will not change. So China's policy to North Korea will maintain two tracks unbalanced. So when the policy China's policy to North Korea changed. So I just mentioned new generations, new needs, okay, come and they will change the concepts. But that happens. I mentioned in my presentation in the 1970s, later 1970s, and the early 1980s, China have a reformation and open up policy. Personally, I think the competition between China and America will end after a few years. It will be another precision, because something I can see, because so in my opinion, okay, when Chinese leaders' conception transformed and their policy to North Korea will change quickly. That's.
Thank you very much for your answers. And now we have come to the end of today's meeting, and I would like to thank again our speakers and the great audience for their participation and contributions during the session. As a moderator, I found that today's discussions on unification and unification diplomacy is very timely and useful. And thank you for your time and attention. Please enjoy yourself at other Jeju Forum sessions in the theme of acting together for a better future, better world outside in Jeju Island too. Thank you very much.